The student-led protests and encampments against the war in Gaza are continuing for a second week in the US. They're demanding their universities drop financial ties to Israel. Well, we have a team of correspondents covering this story for us in the US. In a moment, we'll be live to New York with John Hendren. But first, let's go to Ellen Fisher, who's at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., where students from at least 8 universities have joined the 4th day of protests. And Ellen, I know it's Sunday there. I imagine it's usually relatively quiet on campus. Can you just explain what is happening there now?
Well, let me give you an idea of what it looks like here. You've seen the pictures over the last 3 or 4 days, and you've seen the hundreds of students that come here to protest. The things have slightly changed, and Sunday morning is maybe the best time to give you an idea of what this looks like. If you look out onto the college yard, when this protest started on Thursday, that was entirely covered by people who came here to voice their support. Overnight on Saturday, Friday into Saturday, they put up the metal barrier to split the yard and to contain the protests. Now, if you move further around with the camera, you will see that there are still tents in the yard. There's probably about 20 students who are there. A number of them have left over the last 72 hours or so when they were told that there was the possibility they could lose their university housing, they could possibly not graduate, they might lose credits for the term that's just happened, and so a number of them decided at that point they were going to leave. Now, the university asked the Metropolitan Police, which is the main police service here in Washington, D.C., to help clear the yard on Friday, but the Metropolitan Police decided that they weren't going to do that. The protests were very peaceful, and they didn't think the optics of forcibly removing people who were protesting peacefully would play well, not just here in Washington, D.C., but around the world. But what has happened is there's now almost like a second protest in the street, which has been sealed off by the police, and you can see the camps and the tents that have been set up here. People have been spending the night sleeping in those tents in support of those inside. And the demands really do remain the same, although each of the 8 or so universities that are represented here have their own individual items that they want to see addressed by their institution. Generally speaking, they all agree on a number of things. They want to make sure that every asset that is possibly linked to Israel is divested, that there are no continuing academic links between the US, these universities and Israel as well. They want to make sure that those who organise the protest will face an amnesty, that they will not be face any sort of disciplinary action as well. And they want to make sure that pro-Palestinian speech on these campuses will not be penalised in any way, that it will be allowed, because there have been a number of complaints that as soon as you talk in pro-Palestinian terms, you're immediately described as being anti-Semitic, and they want to make sure that that is taken care of by the authorities. Now, a couple of the administrators from George Washington have been in the square in the last couple of hours. They've spoken to some of the people in the courtyard, but those that are here say what they said way back on Thursday: until their demands are met, they're not moving.
OK, thanks so much, Ellen. We really appreciate that. Ellen Fisher for us there at George Washington University. Well, this is day 4 of protests at the City University of New York. On day 1, campus police tried to shut it down and protesters pushed them back. Let's bring in John Hendren, who is at the City University now. And John, this protest site specifically remains under constant threat of being shut down. Can you just explain exactly why that is?
That's right. Here on the first day on Thursday, when they set up this camp, campus police came in and tried to shut it down, tried to tear down the tents. Students pushed them back. And these are the most fearless protesters of all of the campuses we've been at. And there's good reason for that. This is City University of New York. Unlike elite institutions like those Alan was talking about, where tuition can be $60,000, $70,000 a year, and students are worried about losing the education they've dreamed of and tens of thousands of dollars, tuition here is at a more democratic level, small d, at about $6,000. And so most of the students we see here, unlike at Princeton, where we were yesterday, where students were masking their faces and trying to abide by all the university's rules, here they're not doing that. When the security came in just the other day, there was a security guard here on Friday, and he was just trying to enter this space, and students blocked him off from doing so. And you can see there's a constant police presence here. That is a light stand which police have set up, presumably, if they want to clear this place out at night to light it up. And if you look across the street, you can see those are campus police positioned there. So there's a constant presence here, but unlike at other campuses where students are very concerned about whether they're going to be kicked out and whether they're going to lose their status at the university, here they're pretty much fearless. These students, by and large, don't wear masks. They push back on security when they come, and they're intent on staying here. You can see these tents are in defiance of university policy, but they're remaining in place. So here at City University of New York, you have a very aggressive and confident protest presence, and they're not going to allow security to come in here. Now, if the New York Police Department comes in, that's a whole different story. And that could happen here, unlike other campuses, because it's run by the city of New York. So Mayor Eric Adams, if he decided to, could override any concerns by the university and send police in here to shut this place down. And 200 people have been arrested over the past 24 hours at Washington University, in St. Louis, Northeastern University in Boston. So that's a constant threat everywhere. But here it's a particular threat because the city itself could decide to shut this place down. So far, protesters have resisted all attempts.
Okay, thank you so much for all of that. That is John Hendren for us there in New York. Well, we're going to stay with this story, and Melanie K is a professor of international affairs at Harvard University. She joins us from New York. Thank you very much for being with us on Al Jazeera. Now, we heard our correspondents there talking about the pressure that has been placed on the protesters, on these students that are speaking out. But how has the government, especially Congress, been putting pressure on the universities themselves during these protests? And what impact is that having?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me. There's a larger game going on here in which members of Congress are weaponizing this fight to try to control university life and are threatening sanctions such as taxing university endowments or withholding federal funding for research, which could have a very serious impact on universities. So beyond the relationship between protesters and university administrations, we have a second level playing out between Congress, the U.S. government, and university administrations as well.
Are those just idle threats, or is that a serious concern for these universities?
These are very serious concerns, regardless of how you feel about the protests and university reactions. These are extremely serious concerns because there's a large amount of federal funding that supports research across campuses in the United States, and endowments play an extremely important role in funding the operations of universities. So these are serious threats that university administrators are very concerned about. And so the actions of Congress are not just, political efforts to exert Congress's control over academic freedom or free speech, but they also potentially may be serious threats with material implications.
Well, we've seen a range of tactics used by different university administrations around the United States when it comes to trying to break up these protests. I mean, what do you think has worked so far, and how do you think that universities should be handling them?
Yeah, so I think it's pretty clear that repression doesn't work in this case. And we actually know this from political science research, that under many conditions, repressing protests and mobilization actually backfires and causes activists to double down on their efforts. And that seems to be playing out here on university campuses. You can just look to the example of Columbia, where the president cracked down, and now we've just seen waves of additional protesters coming out. So I think, the choice of hardcore repression often backfires. There's some variation state to state because some U.S. states have actually criminalized BDS and adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which equates any criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. And this puts activists and protesters in a different set of situations as well.
Something a little bit more subtle now. I mean, how much disinformation is happening around these protests? Because there are very different narratives, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we're living in the era of disinformation on social media, and people's algorithms tailor their social media feeds to their preferences. But it's quite evident that there's a fair amount of disinformation based on reporting, not just by people posting on social media, but by journalists, that by and large, these protests are entirely peaceful. We even see sort of multicultural communities breaking out on campuses where you have Jewish students who are an important component of the protests as well, sharing Passover Seders with Muslim students who've never been to them before. So by and large, these are very peaceful protests, and most of the slogans are not meant to be provocative, although, you know, there are some examples where people have taken exception with some of the slogans, including in some of the reporting.
Right. Just very briefly, before we've got to let you go, how do you think that this is going to play out? Do you think that there's still momentum behind these protests and that they could escalate further?
Yes, I think there's definitely a real possibility for further escalation. I don't think this is going anywhere. And sure, many of these protests will be shut down at some point with brute force and arrests, or perhaps some negotiations between protesters and university administration. That may play out well. I think that's probably the best scenario, to have a kind of negotiated solution. It remains to be seen whether there can be some meeting point of administrators and student demands.
OK, we'll have to leave it there, but we really do appreciate your time and your insight into all of this. That's Melanie K, Professor of International Affairs at Harvard University. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.